Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on AI fraud. Now, it's no secret that the emergence of Gen AI has fundamentally shifted the way society functions. From individuals to enterprises, we are all leveraging AI in one form or another. Now, this is no different for bad actors around the world. In fact, globally, I think in 2024, over $1 trillion were lost to scammers, and the increased use of AI will, of course, further accelerate this issue. Some reports are even indicating that there are over 400% increase in Gen AI enabled scams. So, what can we do? What can banks do to protect their customers? And today I'm joined by a panel of experts to answer these questions and more. Right above on top there, we have returning guest, Gabby Thomas, who is now the group head of operations at RCBC Bank. Below Gabby, we have Albert De La Cruz, the CISO for GoTime Bank in the Philippines. Below Albert, we have Jiming, who is the head of financial crime compliance at ZMB Singapore. And last but not least, we're also joined by Lucas Bayer, who is heading the Biometrics user acquisition and UX team at Jumio. Gents, welcome to the show. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you for having us, Vince.
Yes,
All right,
good afternoon.
glad to have everyone tuning in today. So let's start by going broad and look at some of the trends that's happening around this space. So maybe I'll start with Albert, who's on Gabby, who's on top, then Albert, then Jiming, followed by Lucas. What are some of the biggest ways that you've seen the advent of Gen AI change the game for fraudsters and scammers?
Thanks, Vincent. I think I remember talking to you about this
Yeah.
on two different occasions through about 4 years, right?
Mm.
And I think in the last meeting we talked about Gen AI, and I said that was the new secret weapon.
Mm.
So we're seeing exactly, and I hate to be right, uh, democratization of the tool. The barriers to entry have gone down. So Gen AI, no code capabilities bring fraud tools to low level, unskilled actors. So essentially, you don't need a high set of skills to be able to implement a fraud solution. You just have to know who to talk to. In fact, we're seeing crime as a service is an offering in the dark web. And so that has translated to a lot of nuances in the client landscape, especially for Philippines. While we aren't yet seeing deepfakes and voice fakes, but we are seeing relentless, higher volume of attacks, more contextual attacks, more convincing attacks, and very targeted towards vulnerable segments of the market. So that means that they are doing their homework, their analytics, the study of their data, the study of their hit rate, whether they're successful or not. And that's all part and parcel of the new challenge, the evolving challenge we continue to face.
I think it's such a shame that you were right 4 years ago. I remember we did have this conversation. I knew
Right.
that you were onto something, but it's a shame that 4 years later we're actually seeing some of these things coming to fruit, which is unfortunate. And I think it is definitely made it a lot easier for people to, unfortunately, commit cybercrime at a scale. Thanks for sharing your views. Let's move on to Albert. Albert, how have you seen the rise of AI shape the way that fraudsters and scammers approach these things?
Right. Thanks, Vince. Actually, when Gabby was speaking, it kind of like reminded me the difference between
Mm,
hackers and script kiddies, if you still remember those terms, right? So if there's any one thing major that what AI had done to change the game for fraudsters is that and this is supporting again Gabby's statement, is that AI has actually industrialized fraud. So we now see all of those sorts, deep fake, impersonation attacks, high level leadership team management. Sometimes our chairman is now is now the subject of AI generated investment schemes, right? There's AI assisted social engineering, that sometimes they dynamically adapt during mid conversation. So in a nutshell, the fraud playbook we were to say something about it today, as opposed to 4 years ago, Gab, is that the fraud playbook is now digital. No, it's scalable and adaptive. So it really, by leaps and bounds, changed the way we do things, like what Vincent said, and also changed the way we defend things on
Yeah,
fraud.
totally agree.
It's really crazy how fast things change in 4 years. Jiming, your views?
Yeah, if I to give a Singapore specific context, right? Then
Mm,
you refer to newspaper sources.
yeah.
Then Singapore recorded almost 1,500% surge in deep
Wow.
fake fraud cases. 2024. So you have these deep fake videos, right? Whereby it's so easy. It's clickbait, right? You direct users to online malicious websites, and then you kind of trust it. And interestingly, very recent, on the 2nd of July this year, the Singapore Cyber Security Agency, CSA, conducted a survey. I think it involved about thousand-ish, 1,050 respondents. So it's age 15 and above. And the poll was conducted sometime in October 2024. Now, what's interesting is I think 80% of the respondents kind of commented, we are confident of able to identify deepfakes. We can identify telltale signs of suspicious contents. We can actually determine unsynchronized lip movements. But in actual fact, only slightly about one quarter of the respondents could really distinguish between deepfake and legitimate videos when they were actually put on a test. So if I were to summarize the situation right now, right, I would put it to two main pointers, right? Even smart and very cautious people, you think you are smart and you think you are very cautious, but you can be fooled. And the second part is, right, the fraudulent and scam messaging, right, in a term has become so scripted and industrialized, and it is becoming so believable. And I think that's the reason why, if you look at it from a global perspective, actually, then if I will refer you back to even in the US, the FBI kind of issued, I think they issued a certain report. They call it Criminals Use Generative AI to Facilitate Financial Frauds in around December 2024. And that shows you how pervasive this AI has been used or misused to actually perpetrate frauds. Yeah.
And actually, in fact, like a similar report by Deloitte pointed out that the potential losses in 2025, it's
Yeah.
in the billions. I don't remember the exact number, but it's a big number, right?
Yeah, it
And
is.
before moving on to Lucas, I just wanted to also point out that for the first time in my life,
Mm.
I am starting to see people around me that are actually falling for scams, right? Which wasn't the case before. So
Mm.
anecdotally, I do feel that it's becoming more and more of a pervasive and I guess critical issue to be addressed. Maybe Lucas, you can provide some perspective from the global point of view, from the biometrics point of view, authentication point of view. What are you seeing in this space?
Yeah, so we have been seeing a significant shift
Yeah.
in attack vectors. In the past, the fraudsters, they were using the classic presentation attack, so going through journeys like showing paper printouts or digital representation of someone's face. And over the last 2 or 3 years, this has completely changed. Meanwhile, the number one attack vectors are deepfake attacks, injection attacks, because those are scalable. The fraudsters, with easy tools, they can now generate thousands of images, and not only selfies, but they can also generate ID images. It's completely synthetic, and with those they can do large scale attacks, and that's the problematic. In the past it was high effort and little reward. Now it's little effort and high reward, because you can, if you are able to bypass a system and inject like thousands of spoofs, it ends up in huge financial losses. And we talked about the tooling already. The tools have become so good that it's impossible for humans to distinguish if something is now a deep fake or if it's a real human face. And that's why you need really sophisticated solutions that are able to identify those attacks.
So on that note, right, Lucas, I remember last July, during one of the Federal Reserve conferences, Sam Altman was speaking, and one of the things he said that kind of stood out to me, and I quote, he said, "AI has fully defeated most of the ways that people authenticate currently, and that there is a impending fraud crisis being faced by banks at the moment." What are your thoughts on the statement? Do you think it's a lot of truth in there, or do you think it's an overblown statement?
Yeah, I would say biometrics are far from defeated. It has changed significantly, and you can now use a lot of the tooling that help you create those spoofs, and you can fake face biometrics. But that's why you need to add additional logic to your systems. We believe in a multi-layer defense strategy in which you combine biometrics with other risk signals, such as device risk or identity intelligence, that help you tackle fraud in many different aspects and not just from the biometrics perspective.
And do any of the panelists have any differing views about what Sam Altman said about the impending fraud crisis that banks may be facing?
But I tend to agree with Lucas. I think the technologies are far from defeated. That's not where I think the vulnerability lies. The vulnerability lies simply with the user still. Right? The social engineering aspect, no matter what kind of identification measures we put in, if the fraudsters are able to get into the psychology of the users and convince them that the transaction that they think they're doing is legitimate, then whatever measures you put in will be essentially defeated. So it must come hand in hand, the technology and the customer awareness and education. That is very important.
For sure. And to the point about it being the users that is sometimes the weakest link, I think we're seeing increased sophistication, right? There was a time where I think when we read a lot of frauds and scams, most of the stories are talking about the elderly falling for certain typologies and losing the retirement. But in the past 2 or 3 years, we're seeing like in Hong Kong, there's a case of deepfake where they lost several million. Even in Malaysia, Singapore, there is a bank that was a near miss, right? Nearly transferred out close to $1 million, and allegedly that was the reason why this CFO lost their job as well. So the game has kind of shifted quite a little bit. I just want to go back to Jiming's point earlier about people being confident in Singapore about being able to identify scams, being able to identify deepfakes. I think another report that was issued by the Global Anti-Scam Alliance also pointed out that of all the Southeast Asian countries, Singapore was the highest in terms of the amount of dollars they've lost to scams and fraud, despite a lot of the initiatives that is, launched by the Monetary Authority of Singapore. Why do you think that is, Jimmy?
Wow, this seems like
Start heavy, you know?
it is. Okay, I think at a high level, put in a context, right? The key scam typologies in Singapore generally include things like your e-commerce, job scams, investment, love scam, impersonation scam. So indeed, Singapore seems to be an attractive scam target. But I think let's contextualize it, right? There are a few factors. So if you compare the so-called median wealth of adults in Singapore, is kind of higher than the global median. So the average mean and median of your net worth per adult in Singapore works out to be about 500,000 and about 134,000 respectively, right? So which means that it is a very quote-unquote lucrative group of people whom you can potentially scam lah. So back to your point, Vincent, interestingly, we always believe that perhaps the older one becomes, it is more vulnerable. But although I don't have the statistics on hand, but it is shown that white collar, in fact, the learned, all right, and in fact, your even professionals, they are prone to being scammed because they spend a lot of time on their phones, and a lot of these scams actually works in WhatsApp, Facebook. So if you look at Singapore's internet penetration rate, it is almost close to 96% of the Singapore population as of early 2025. That means that high levels of digital penetration and internet access gave the scammers the ability to reach out to potential victims much more easily. And from a trending perspective, two things Warren mentioned. So in the past 12 months, like I kind of allude to, the frequent use platforms for scam activities will be Facebook's, Telegram, WhatsApp, and scammers are also increasingly employing social engineering, psychological manipulation into deceiving victims to making payments or you divulge personal or financial information. And culturally, I don't know whether the audience agree or not agree. It is said that Singapore is a very high trust society, and that probably explains why it is comparatively easier for scammers deception. Now in Singapore, this government official impersonation scam is real issue. So if you compare in the first half of 2025, this government official impersonation scam increased by about 200% compared to the same period to more than 1,760 cases. Yeah, so these are the broad factors which kind to explain why Singapore, despite the literacy etc., seems to be more exposed or more lucrative from a scammer perspective lah. Yeah,
So I mean, like there are some stats to illustrate what you were talking about, right? So in
yeah,
Southeast Asia, 63% of adults that were surveyed said that they have experienced a scam in the past year. About an estimated of 23.6 billion were lost, and
yeah,
a lot of these are increasingly your Gen Zs, your millennials, your Gen Xers. So it's not just the elderly population, right? And
correct,
again, I've also
correct.
seen professionals around my circle that are really intelligent people who unfortunately were victims to this, whether on a personal level or on a corporate level, where they fall
Yeah.
for these things as well, right? So maybe let's move on over to Gabby and Albert to kind of give us a sense of what's happening in the Philippines. What's the landscape there like?
Albert,
Uh,
I'll let you go first.
Okay,
All right.
Albert, go ahead. You have the
Thanks.
floor.
Thanks, Gab. Sorry, there was a lot of thoughts streaming in my mind in
Yeah,
the
yeah, I'm sure.
conversation. So,
Yeah.
one was Jimeng was saying
Mm.
that people claim that they can identify immediately spot deepfakes, right? So I was thinking, well, maybe the vendors were coaching them to a Lucas statement is that that's true. Technology will always be technology. One technology will be better than the other, but a combination of the technologies would ensure that no single technology can be defeated. So sorry, just background thoughts in my head. In terms of the Philippines, it's still fraud, of course. Lately, I would say the past couple of months or in the early part of the year, we have seen an increase in SMS phishing, primarily because of the presence of IMSI catchers. These in between machines that impersonates the telco and impersonates the phone, which goes to the malls to rich subdivisions, and because they can intercept everything, SMS is not encrypted. They can now copy the vanity numbers, right? That you were really used to rely on and you trusted for a number of years, and then all of a sudden it messaged you into something. So that has been really an uptick in that area. The second is there's a lot of focus now by our regulator, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, on resiliency. And of course, there's a recent law that I'm sure Gabby's familiar because we're all scouring to comply, is the APASA law, which really focuses a lot on mules, fraud, and the like. No? So that's a lot of controls that the government had put in place recently that I think would greatly help in controlling. I'm sure not eliminating those frauds, but those are the top of my mind. What we have now in the country, Vince.
Just before we move on to Gabby, just a quick follow-up question, right? Because even speaking to some of the digital banks in the region, meals are a big problem, and I find that
Oh,
some of them has mentioned to me that because of how easy it is to onboard to digital banks, a lot of mules have targeted digital banks specifically. Is that the same experience in the Philippines?
Um, Gab, just to add, no, we've been talking about and
Mm,
Vince, we've been talking about
mm,
the parameters that we can measure,
yeah,
number of
yeah.
phones,
Mm,
culture, Gen Z, Gen X. But
mm,
there's one parameter that we actually don't have exact numbers on, and that is the psychological and emotional state of a person. So regardless, like you, like me, I have very intelligent friends who you fell for that, so you fell for that, you're better than that, right? But because they take care of the side that we don't have a visibility on, and that practically makes everybody vulnerable because we can't measure that particular aspect of an individual.
yep. Thank you for that. And Gabby, your sense of things.
Yeah, I fully agree with Albert
Mm,
there. I think the incidence of cell site simulators he talks about just points to the fact that the bad actors are really looking for vulnerabilities, structural, emotional,
mm,
psychological, and unfortunately, that seems to be where people are falling. So there is a concentration there. So for us, there's good news and bad news. We find that there are much more relentless, much higher volume of attacks. The good news is that our clients are reporting these to us because they are more aware. That means our bulletins, our tactics to inform them are effective. The bad news is the fact that there are relentless attacks. And even I myself have received some of these alerts. In fact, one of them caught my attention because he told me that if you did, we monitored a transaction from you buying a expensive gadget from this well-known expensive gadget brand. If this wasn't yours, please click on this link. So it caught my attention. I said, well, that's new. That will really make you think twice, right? And Albert is right. And remember, we talked about right out of the pandemic. I told you that psychologically people are vulnerable coming out of the pandemic. Well, apparently, it was not just a post-pandemic phenomena. They are still psychologically vulnerable, right? And the underlying psychological assumptions are the same. Make a quick buck, get a prize, all the way to product offering, all the way to fear of actually something happening to me. So that all points to the fact that not only do we need to educate our customers, but they need to become tech savvy. We no longer can say that, oh, I'm averse to tech, so I'm not going to go online. In fact, 2 years ago, that was the favorite victim, those who did not have a presence online, right? And so that goes hand in hand. I think that's a good way to summarize what's happening in the country right now. It's still the same old vectors, but much, much sharper, much more contextual, much more specific. And there seems to be much greater amount of success now in these particular vectors.
So I think to your point, Gabby, that when we last chat, we were talking about different kind of vulnerabilities, right? And I think it's a very human element to always have some form of vulnerability, and I think they're very attuned to that to really be able to hone in on what specifically that is, right? And
That's
sometimes
right.
it's not just a broad vulnerability. Sometimes it's just all they need is one moment of distraction.
That's right.
Maybe your child's running around and then you're distracted and oh no, my bank is like, and then you fall for it, right? And I think that's
Yes.
really the challenge that we also have as well among many other challenges. And of course, to Jibing's point earlier about how a lot of adults were very confident that they can detect deepfakes, but I feel like a lot of perception of being able to detect deepfake is from deepfake technology that's a year or 2 year ago, which is very obvious. But you see Google's VO3 Nano Banana it's so advanced that even I'm struggling sometimes to tell whether it's real or not. I have to take a double take. So I think that's really the reality that we are facing today, right? So I think now that we've gotten a good sense of what's the threat landscape, what's the typologies out there, I guess my next question to the panelists, and maybe we'll start back with Lucas. Are we prepared to deal with these threats? And maybe Lucas can give us a broad view of things and then zoom back into what's happening in Asia and Southeast Asia. Lucas, you have the floor.
Yeah. Yeah. As I said, we've been already seeing deepfake attacks for the last 2-3 years, and we have already expected that the number of deepfakes will increase over time. That's why we have started already quite early to invest in AI technology to defeat AI attacks. The problem that I see is that many businesses, so most of our customers, they just start to realize that deepfakes are a real attack vector that is heavily exposed and that you need to defend against. Most of those customers, they believe that one solution, like just doing IDV or doing biometrics, will solve all of the deepfake attacks that they see. But the perception has to change here, because as I already called out earlier, one solution is maybe not enough to defend against all the attacks. So you need to have this multi-layer defense strategy where you use all of the different risk signals that are available to make it harder for the fraudsters to defend against those spoofs. So I think we are prepared, and also a lot of our competition is also ready. But there was still, with this fast evolving developments that the AI tools are having, we need to stay ahead of the fraudsters, and that's our number one mission.
Sure. Thank you for that. And before we move on to Jiming, to also get a sense of how prepared the banks are to deal with these threats, maybe we'll just take one quick question from one of the audience members. This seems like it's right up your alley. How are banks and non-bank financial institutions distinguishing between AI-generated and legitimate documents such as IDs and bank statements for things like eKYC and credit assessments / underwriting? Your thoughts, Lucas?
Yeah, well, that's one of the biggest challenges. You need to identify the fraudulent cases, and you need to allow the good users to pass. There are a lot of ways how you can identify digital attacks, such as deepfakes. There are also government databases where you can ping to check if the data is valid. But in most of the cases, we get to see the physical documents that people are uploading to us. And there are a lot of ways how you can distinguish. To be fair, the documents, the fake documents, they are now getting more sophisticated. It's same as for biometrics. It's hard for a human to distinguish, is this now a deep fake or is it a real person? And the same applies to ID documents as well. So there are a lot of ways still how you can identify them. I will not explain that now on the call how you can do that. But with AI supported technology, you are able to identify a lot of those AI patterns.
All right, thank you for that, Lucas. Moving on to Jiming. Are we prepared as banks to deal with some of these emerging threats, and what are we doing differently these days?
Okay, I think the thing is, this scam is actually a global issue, right? If not, it's at least a regional thing. So apart from banks, I think we have to recognize that governments, the telco companies, etc., all play a part in it. So if you ask generally what kind of tools are available, mandated by government over time, you have these kill switches, money locks, you have these enhanced verification processes, etc., and you have got these proactive alerts. Now, apart from this, right, perhaps I give you two perspectives, and throughout the conversation that the panel is having now, right, there's one common thing which runs deep, right, is on human psychology. So if you ask my perspective, I still think, firstly, education and public awareness, very important. Whether is it on a national basis whereby government, the police force issue advisories, or be it bank specific, on the website you give certain information, this part about educating cannot be undermined or underestimated. Although at some point in time, there's this question that arises, right? Why, despite all these advisories and despite the trainings and despite all the programs, people still fall for it? It still fall back to psychology. And apart from the fact that it could be greed when it comes to investment scams, and very much the issue about fear is very real. And therefore, some of the things that the Singapore banks have done, which I think is quite commendable, is from an educational point of view, they give very detailed typologies. They even inform the customers what to do, what not to react. So there's one part in terms of overall awareness at the national as well as the so-called financial sector specific. Secondly, I'm not sure whether is it the right statement to make, but if your scammers and your fraudsters are relying heavily and substantially on technology to win the scam game, to that extent, financial institutions, of course, depending on the size and your customer base, right? We cannot preclude the fact that we may need to consider using machine learning or even AI, for example, to catch this. So going back to the point that Lucas made earlier on, right? Fake documents. So it is not a secret, right? For people who have been doing customer due diligence. In fact, you can go to some of these websites and you pay quite a decent sum of money and you can get very seemingly looking legitimate documents. And for those who are familiar with trade financing, you find that nowadays, if you look at the fraudulent bills of lading, for example, it is almost like the real thing until you send for verification. So in a nutshell, be it different types of banking sectors, to the most fundamental in terms of your onboarding, right? Then we need to probably explore whether some kind of technology can be, for example, deployed for detection. It could be your selfie verification. It could be as quote unquote simple as your liveliness detection to catch spoofing attacks, for example. Yeah.
So I have two branching thoughts from this conversation, right? So I think one is education and the other is the use of AI to fight against AI scams. But before we branch out to those themes, let's jump to Albert to also get his thoughts on whether or not we're doing enough, and also I guess the other additional layer for Albert is that you guys are a greenfield bank, right? So you recently built GoTime from scratch. So I guess on one dimension is, are we prepared? And on the other dimension is, when you guys built out GoTime Bank, is there anything that you went in thinking that, okay, we should do this differently with a new bank? Albert, you have the floor. You might be muted. Let's unmute you.
Yeah,
there we go.
Sorry, just to make sure that you don't get any stray comments from my end, just in case my thoughts run wild. Which I was thinking, there was a backstory. Gabby knows this perfectly well. We had this law called the SIM Registration Act, and to activate your SIM, you have to register, put in your ID, and then after a couple of weeks, we discovered that people were putting up pictures of Homer Simpson. What's that again? Jon Snow, and they were all accepted. So yes, definitely we need to level up our game on authentication. The question is a little unfair for the other banks. I came from a traditional bank before I went to GoTime, so it's digitally native. But if we pose the same question to me, I would say there's a readiness divide, right? Traditional bank often has this what we call legacy inertia, right? Digital banks like GoTime and the rest of other digital banks are natively agile because we started, cloud native. We can integrate AI directly into fraud stacks, iterate faster, and respond to signal changes, maybe not real time, but near real time. So it's kind of an unfair question. But that's what I think is the gap there between the traditional banks on how ready they would be, is because of the legacy inertia. A lot are still using mainframes and mid-range computers as their core banking. So that alone, would really put a lot of strain in trying to put that into the AI bandwagon, so to speak, and have all the signals collected and analyzed.
Thank you for that. Gabby, do tell us what you think about whether the banking industry is ready, and do feel free to also defend your incumbent banking brethren. You have the floor.
I'm sure.
Gabby.
I'm sure Gabby is already thinking of moving to the cloud anyway. So,
Well, we are a six-time Best Digital Bank of the Year, so enough said there. I guess from the agile side. But really, to your question about whether we are ready, I don't think we have any choice. That's where the battlefield is. We have to follow, and we have been following. Um, I will not harp on the customer education piece. I think that's been beaten. I think the point is across. I'll talk about technology, and from another aspect, collaboration, I think, is key. One of the things happening in the Philippines now is that we are now fortifying the perimeter. So we have a network approach among banks and with the regulators and with law enforcement, so that if there is any incident, there is a way to trace and try to ring fence the proceeds, try to catch them. So that the industry has been working on, and there are very positive developments on that side. I think that underlies the fact that aside from customer awareness and education and technology solutions, we now have to collaborate effectively. And as Albert had said, even the public sector has come up with tools to help us. One of the key features of the AFASA law is that it enables the central bank to now investigate particular accounts without fear of bank secrecy. That gives them now cover from bank secrecy. Number two, I think, and that's very important, was that there's a direct mention of e-commerce fraud and mule accounts. That was a legal impediment in the past, because if a mule account was to receive fraudulent proceeds, the owner of the mule account was not seen as a participant in the crime. So that would stop the investigation right there. But now you penalize even people who sell their accounts for whatever purpose they don't even know. So there's a lot of collaboration ongoing in the Philippines jurisdiction, and so we are moving where our clients need us to be.
I think that's a common thread that we're seeing across the market, right? From the AFASA to Singapore's responsibility framework, protection from scams act, even in Malaysia as well. I think what we recognize is that it's not a singular responsibility of the banks, but shared across the variety of market players to also be involved as well. Thanks for that, Gabby. So I think let's move back to Jiming, and the next thing that I kind of wanted to talk about, because we were branching out to two conversation teams, right? One was the use of AI to fight the use of AI, and the other is education. So the first question is, are we really doing enough with education? Because I've said on so many of these panels, right? And
Yep.
I'm sure, Gabby, you've also heard in the previous panels as well. Oh yeah, we've got to educate the customers. But most of the time, a lot of education just comes in the form of one singular email or one text to say don't fall for scams. Are we really thinking deeply enough about how we can change our UI to have the nudges at the right spot, or even simple things, right? And I think I've also brought this up in past panels as well. Like Revolut, they will have calls that's only in-app as well. That could prevent a lot, because I'm also getting a lot of scam call from my banks that's not actually from my banks. If it's only coming from the app, then it would prevent a lot of those, like, oh, Vincent, you owe money, and then somehow I get scammed. That's the first layer to the question, right? Are we doing enough in education? Should we do more? And the second layer to the question is, how are we also using AI to better AI? I know it's a loaded question, so feel free to take your time to answer the two questions. Jiwing, you have the floor.
So the thing is that if you ask whether, from my point of view, are we doing enough in educating the public, educating our customers? I have to take a more supportive stance, at least in Singapore, by stating that in the past 24 months, government, the police force, different banks, they have done a lot in terms of customers' education. They have done a lot in reach out. And trust me, if you visit some of these local bank websites, some of this information is very informative. And you can get not too technical, but they tell you in essence what to avoid. But we can never become complacent, right? To the extent we still need to continuously drum in that messaging. And we also cannot assume that people will visit the website. So we will have ongoing posters. We're going to have ongoing, if you like, short snippets, commercials, etc. But it's still got off fundamentally to psychology and individual, right? And I give you real examples, and I've seen them in recent months, right? How would you explain the fact that, you have a probably elderly man who went to over a bank counter and actually is very convinced that he wants to withdraw high amount of cash and it is for certain investments. And guess what? When the counter staff inform to the elderly man by saying that, gentlemen, your proposition seems a little bit fishy, maybe rethink. And this old gentleman, right, after having left branch number 1, right, at location A, 45 minutes appear in branch C in some other location. And I don't know whether he was trained or he just want to bypass that mechanism, right? Same thing. He wants to withdraw, let's say, $200,000. And then the counter asks the same question. Hey, what are you withdrawing funds for? This time the story changed. I'm withdrawing the funds because I need to pay expenses for my son's wedding. And guess what? That transaction went too. So I just want to highlight that, yes, I strongly believe that banks in Singapore have done a lot in this area, but it takes two hands to clap, right? If for some reasons people still fall for it despite that reminder, sometimes it is real frustrating, but it's reality. So that is the portion on education. I think to sum it up, Singapore banks, Singapore government, the agencies have done a lot, but we cannot be complacent. We still need to continuously drum in the thing. Let's do so. Now, using the same technology to fight the fraudsters and scammers, I think it's important. And just to kind of explain to the point, right? The use of ID document verification algorithms, for example, that are necessary to catch manipulated IDs. For example, the fraudsters may have used a very good photo editing software to change the date of a legitimate ID. Or even, I'm not sure whether some of the participants here have actually seen totally synthetic identification document. Synthetic means totally, completely fabricated, but looks very real, and these are AI generated. But to the extent, if you use a normal eyeballing, right, I think it is quite hard, in fact, close to impossible to differentiate between what is and what is not. And also on the point about, nowadays we allow customers to onboard remotely, non-face-to-face, etc. Then we need to consider whether we have to think about is necessarily to use advanced selfie verification. How about the liveliness detection? So without going to technicalities, right? You want to prevent deepfakes. The solution, therefore, must control the selfie process, and the whole process must take into a series of images to determine whether the person is physically present and awake. But again, without the use of technology, sometimes it is very difficult to differentiate. And just to give an example, right? My mom is in her 80s. Every night, almost every week, she will ask me this question because she goes to YouTube, she goes to Facebook, and then she keeps asking me, hey, is it true that someone and someone actually passed away? Is it true that someone and someone owe someone money? And I ask her, where do you get this information from? She says, I saw them from Facebook. I saw them from YouTube. But all these so-called voice cloning, all these kind of deep fake images are very real. Then the question is that, can a normal person using just the eyeballs actually able to differentiate between so-called the reality versus the fake? Very difficult. Yeah.
It's definitely tough. It's definitely tough. And I think one thing that occurred to me while you were bringing out some of these examples is that not only are the banks educating the consumers, but the scammers are also probably educating the consumers how to bypass some of the systems, right? So it's like two things that's happening on the same time. Thanks for your perspective, Jiming. Lucas, the two questions, right? One is how are banks using AI to fight some of this AI-enabled fraud? And also the other thing is, are banks really truly doing enough to educate their customers?
Yeah, let me start with the second one. In many cases, the banks, they go through very rigorous testing, which slows down their ability to use new AI defenses or new AI attack defenses quickly. So I've been in constant talks with various customers in also different industries, not only banking. And in many cases, it's quite hard to convince also the compliance departments that new tooling is required. So let's say device risk or identity intelligence, because due to the old thinking, like they need to go through testing for a very long time, it's still in the mindset. And I want to hear the opinion also from the other panelists here. But in many cases, it's very slow, I would say, compared to how quickly fraudsters are using the evolved AI tools. So the fraudsters, they are so quickly in adjusting to the new tools. Even if we provide this functionality as ID verification provider, the banks need to start leveraging them. And I think there is still some room for improvement, also in how our customers, and I'm not only talking about banks here, are leveraging the technology, because you can have the best technology if the people are not using it, it will not help you in fighting fraud. So I think that is something which has to change in the perception of the people's minds, because then we can stay ahead of the fraudsters.
For sure. I mean, you got to use the tool, right? At the end of the day.
Exactly.
Anything you want to add on the note of education, or shall I move on to Gabby?
Well, it's always helpful to educate the end users and
Yeah.
really explain to them that they shouldn't open links from unknown sources, or even raise the awareness of how they can use multi-factor authentication solutions. Because in many cases, and I know it from my parents, they are still old school and they are not leveraging all the security features that are available, even if I try to educate them and I can tell them from first-hand experience. But it's the convenience that they prefer. So they prefer convenience over security. And our challenge at Joomla is also we want to add as much friction as possible to make it harder for fraudsters, but at the same time, the regular end users, they should not feel this additional friction because we want to convert them as much as possible. So you need to find this balance between security and conversion, because the vast majority of users, they are still good users. But it's the small fraction of fraudsters that is causing a lot of pain.
100%. Gabby, your views?
Yeah, I just want to first latch on to that last statement by Lucas about friction. I think what we need to think about now is what really is this customer experience looking like in the new landscape? I remember about 4 years ago, the CX journey we talked about was one that was frictionless, easy, purely digital. We were envisioning an experience where the client can do everything and anything online, right? And we've seen that that comes with attendant risks. We knew it then, but it is really magnified now. So the challenge really is how do we introduce these control points, effective control points, without, as Lucas said, adding friction on the client side. That's a challenge. And for better or for worse, I believe there will be a bit more friction points with the clients if we want to secure them. Because even if you give them a really good experience, if tomorrow, next week, they find that they have been compromised, then the experience is terrible, no matter how nice it was when they did it. And so I think it goes back to customer education awareness. They have to know that these friction points are there to protect them. We're doing this for them. We're with them in this, right? And I think that cannot be emphasized enough. That customers need to be aware of what we are trying to do, but what they need to do as well. And that also begs the question of technology proficiency. It's no longer, do you want to be technology proficient? You have to be technologically proficient. There is no choice. There's no ifs and buts. There's no other way to do it, right?
So, I mean, just to quickly add to your point before moving on to Albert, right? I think recently the Monetary Authority of Singapore managing director also said that banks need to lean more towards protecting the customers and prioritizing security over convenience, right? And I think the other dimension is, of course, yes, we want to try to educate them. Yes, this friction is here to protect the consumers, but sometimes it's a lot more difficult. I think one of the examples that we've seen in Malaysia and also previously in Singapore is not allowing for users to sideload their apps, right? To not allow access if you sideload. But even that takes a lot of education. There's a lot of friction. A lot of them are like, why are you restricting me from doing what I want to do, right? So it's really quite a difficult journey as well. Thanks for your views, Gabby. Albert, your views.
Yeah, when you ask the security guy on security controls, he always say security controls is inversely proportional to usability. So, then it goes to the discussion of, you got to have balance and stuff like that. But I'm sure Lucas can attest to this. There has to be a method of what we can call maybe intelligent friction. There you go, intelligent friction. So you have controls, but you can activate it contextually. So like passive biometrics, continuous authentication, maybe adaptive risk scoring. We would like, of course, being the banks, we would like the clients to have as less friction as possible. And if we can keep that friction in the background, all well and good, right? I'm sure the technology will come in, or there's already technology that can do that. At the same token, from the previous discussions of the group, a thought came to my mind, like, so why the hell are we still using SMS unencrypted in SS7? And I think, what are the telcos doing to retiring those things that actually you can do RCS, right? And stuff like that. And then on the KYC, I think it's a mix of both manual methods of getting the data of people plus electronic checking. Like, for example, in the Philippines, we have a national ID system. The APIs are open for you to validate, right? Those are data which have been obtained, well, semi-manually. You go there, you take your picture, you sign. So there's a real physical attestation that you did it. So that, in combination with whatever high-tech eKYC apps we have, could mean a very good deterrent to those fake IDs and stuff. So I think we're probably not taking advantage of those communications or interactions with the national ID systems that are being offered. Sorry, just
No, certainly some things should be retired, and unfortunately, I think we are running low on time. As we predicted, we won't be able to run through all the questions that we've prepared, because there's such a big topic and there's just so much to talk about, right? So maybe in closing, we'll start with Albert. Maybe you can share with us what are some important points that we haven't had the chance to bring up during this whole conversation, and then maybe just your prediction of where you see the space is going. Then we'll go back to Jimming, and then we'll go back to Lucas, and then we'll go back to Gabby.
Thanks, Vince. So maybe the next 12 months. It's hard to predict 2 years or 4 years. I'm unlike Gabby, who has accurately predicted for the past 4 years. It's pretty obvious, not really a prediction. We see the AI arms race, if you want to call it the AI arms race, really accelerate. But there's also the need to have more collaborative defense. Jimmy have aptly pointed this. I mean, there's really no way to counter this unless all of the stakeholders really band together. and then not just one vertical or the government or telco. It really has to be an all all hands on deck kind of approach. Uh, there would be, I don't know, fraud intelligence networks where information is shared, federated AI, and like I mentioned earlier, continuous context aware authentication should become a standard for digital banking. Less friction. So what's I call it? Yeah, intelligent friction. Uh, enough friction to keep it safe, but not enough to discourage the clients to
Yeah,
to avail of the services. Yeah.
seems like the key takeaway from this session is intelligent friction, right? Thanks for that, Albert. Jimmy, your views, your thoughts,
Yeah.
closing thoughts.
So I've got the two thoughts, right? Firstly,
Mm,
I think it'll be continuous lah. That the
mm,
banking and compliance practitioners will continue to keep on challenging, right? Whether existing risk management frameworks are
mm.
adequate to cover emerging AI technologies,
Yes.
including generative AI generated enabled fraud. Second part is perhaps there might be a push towards hiring new talent and training current employees to spot, to stop, and even report on AI assisted fraud. Yeah.
So the answer is also not just AI, but humans as well, right? To battle
Yeah.
some of these things.
Yes.
Before I move on to Lucas, I just wanted to circle back to one point you brought up earlier. Just a quick follow up, right? You mentioned about how the bank is trying to stop certain customers from going through with transactions that are obviously a lot of
Yeah.
red flags, right? And I think
Yeah.
that reminds me of the regulation that was recently passed, which is the Protection Against Scam Act in Singapore, which
Yes.
gives the Singapore police force the power to stop the transactions from happening.
Yes.
Is that proportionate or too much, you think?
I mean, probably I'm too pro-government. Yes, I think although some people will feel is onerous, but there is certain logic to it because but once you try your best in trying to explain to people, and sometimes people may be complicit, so the government must be empowered to
Mm,
be sometime, for lack of a better word, forcefully stop
mm.
something from manifesting. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. Lucas, your closing views?
Yeah, I believe that the market will shift in the next 1 to 2 years towards digital IDs much more. We heard about synthetic IDs, which are now on a level that are so sophisticated that it's hard to distinguish. So I believe that over the next years, all over the world, governments will issue more digital ID. We see it in the Philippines, we see it in Europe as well, that there are now digital IDs which are even enforced to be used by the citizens. And on top of that, from a biometric space, you need to have this ongoing monitoring, and we call it identity intelligence, where you need to constantly monitor how healthy is one user's identity. Can you trust it or can you not trust them? And that needs to shift from a one-off onboarding process in an ongoing authentication scenario where you still monitor if this is a trusted identity or not.
Right, 100%. Shouldn't be a one-off thing. Thanks for that, Lucas. Gabby, your views, and is it still possible to predict 4 years from now, or the world has changed that we cannot even predict 4 days from now?
Are you now going to ask me to look into my crystal ball?
Yes.
Well, I think the thing we have to look out for, and this is me with my risk hat again, looking at the horizon, is the deepfakes. As a technology computing power advances, the deepfakes will become more and more convincing. And at least here in the Philippines, for good and bad, whatever, they're still profitable with phishing, social engineering. But when that vector starts to fail them, they will turn to other methods. And I think deepfakes will be the next frontier, where you will have voice, video of people very convincing. We've seen this in business email compromise, but I think they'll take it to the next level. And I hope I'm wrong this time. I hope I'm wrong. But that's my view. That's my view. So thank you for having me.
I think you're my favorite person to hope is wrong. But I mean, it's all a lot of doom and gloom. But on the more positive note, if we look at initiatives from around the region, right? Again, in Philippines we have the AFASA, and in Singapore we have the anti-scam act, and with a variety of initiatives there. And even in Malaysia we have the national fraud portal. So like it feels like everybody's getting together to tackle this problem and taking this with the weight and the seriousness that it requires, right? With that, I hope this session has been helpful to everyone, and I hope you guys have a good day and continue to keep on fighting the good fight. All right, take care, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for this webinar.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Vincent.
Thanks.
Thank you.